Welcome. I am so delighted to see all of you here for our first Lunch and Learn webinar of 2023. I'm Tammy Thompson, Outreach and Conference Manager for Deep Roots, and I'm so excited to spend a sunny day talking about native plant design. We return this month with our fourth of our 5-part series, beginner/refresher series. And in this one, in 2022, I kind of give you a little background. In 2022, in coordination with the Mid-America Regional Council and the Health Forward Foundation, Deep Roots developed a series of foundational webinars for beginners, beginning native gardeners, or anyone looking to fill in the gaps. And I think many of us have gaps. So I'm delighted to roll out the fourth in that series today. We will finish this series next month in February, culminating in a roundtable with experts to help us put it all together. So before I talk about today's topic, I'd like to introduce our speaker. I'd like to make just a couple of announcements. First of all, we are incredibly grateful to the Alvin L. Gottlieb Foundation, Mid-America Regional Council, and the Missouri Department of Conservation for all their generous sponsorship of this webinar and all of our other programming. We are also so grateful to you for your support of our programs and our webinars. This webinar will be recorded and up on the Deep Roots website by Monday. You will also receive an email from me with that link and any resources that are mentioned today. And today we do have a full list of resources. So Sarah's put together a ton of resources to accompany this webinar. So watch your email and our website. They're posted there as well. And if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll be notified each time we upload a new video. So far, we've covered your yard's place in the ecosystem, digging up the dirt on healthy soils, and planning your native garden project. All of those recordings are already up on our website, along with the resource documents. And today, we are going to talk about DIY native garden design with Sarah Beyer again. This session uses all of the skills we've covered to date and drills down to the finer elements of design and plant placement. Sarah, as you all know, is an excellent instructor, designer, master naturalist, consultant, and just a really good friend. So today she's going to help us learn how to design your space. Because the series topics have been building upon each other, we will not have a live Q&A at the end. But hang on to those questions, because next month in February, we will bring together all of our subject matter experts to help us navigate through all the questions through all of the series. We also have an exhaustive resource list, like I mentioned, that accompanies the program. And we believe these resources accompanied with the webinar will serve both the beginner and the veteran gardener. So we encourage you to refer to those resources as you go through the series with us and as you refer back. So let's get this party started. During the program, feel free to share your experiences with each other in the chat feature. Again, we will not have a live Q&A until next month. And with that, I'm honored to introduce Sarah Beyer, and this is going to be pre-recorded. So Sarah is a Deep Roots alum and owner of Oak & IO. Most of you know Sarah from her years behind this series and know she's certainly a credible authority in this space. So without further ado, we're going to roll tape.
Hello and welcome back. My name is Sarah Beyer. I am a Kansas City-based native landscape consultant with Oak & IO. Today, we are doing the fourth in our ongoing webinar series, which is a partnership between Mid-America Regional Council and Deep Roots KC. Our webinar series is generously supported by a grant from the Health Forward Foundation, and we're thankful to them for their support. Today, we're going to be talking about designing your garden, trying to break down this process to make it simple and easy, even if you're a first timer, to get started and create something beautiful. So let's dive right in. As we have before, we'll be dividing our time today into 3 sections. First, we'll talk about selecting your native plants and creating a plant palette. Next, we'll talk about pairing and placement. And finally, we'll go over some tips for drawing your design. We have a lot to cover today, so we'll go over the basics, and I'm going to include tons of additional resources in the links that accompany this video, so please take a look through those for anything that you might want more information on. Also, before we jump in, I want to take a minute and encourage you to complete the site assessment process that we discussed in our previous webinar before continuing to the design phase. All of the information covered in that site assessment is going to be important for you to know before you move forward, but you'll especially need to know the light patterns in your space, the soil moisture, your goals for the space, and you'll need to have your site outline done for the area that you would like to design. Once you've done that, you can move on to choosing your plants. This is a book called Planting in a Post-Wild World by Thomas Rainier and Claudia West. It's an excellent resource on native plant gardens. And in the book, they discuss approaching the garden in 3 layers. The first is the structural layer. These are shrubs, small trees, tall statement plants. Next, you have your seasonal layer. This provides blooms and color throughout the year. And finally, the ground cover layer, which is also referred to as green mulch, because living plants are serving the role that we sometimes use wood mulch for. They're using the space, they're filling in and around other plants, and they really mimic nature that way. If you look at the way plants grow in a healthy ecosystem, there aren't large spaces between them. All of the space is being used efficiently. Using green mulch decreases your need for weeding, it protects soil, it buffers temperature changes, and it creates a more healthy ecosystem in your yard. So how do we know what plants are native? How do I know what's native to my area? So there are several resources to find plants. If you're in the Kansas City area, you can start with deeproots.org to find lots of different resources and database links to be able to search plants that are native to your area. Your state's Native Plant Society, both Kansas and Missouri have active native plant societies, and most of the other continental states do too. So if you just type in your state and look for Native Plant Society, you may find a website that has lots of information you can use. There are several regional and national databases that you can use as well. Audubon's Native Plant Database is a great place to start, specifically looking for native plants that help support birds. Your local native plant nursery may be a great resource for you, especially if their website will allow you to filter your search by sun, shade, and moisture. If you live in the Kansas City area, these are your local friendly folks here. You can also check out books of plants that are native to your state or your area. One other resource I want to talk about is bonap.org. That's the Biota of North America program. This is not necessarily a place to find plants that are native to your area, but if you come across a plant and you're not sure if it's native or not, this is a great place to check that out. So I'll explain just a little bit about how to use it. So you can go to bonap.org and kind of start there. I often just Google bonap plus the Latin name or the genus of the plant. So if I want to know if this wild sweet William Phlox divaricata is native to my county or to my state, I would actually usually just type bonap phlox, and that gives me the page that has all of the phlox species on it. They're in alphabetical order, as you can see. So once we find the plant that we specifically are concerned with and click into there, then we get this map, which gives us more detail. The bright green counties here are places where the plant is found and is not considered rare. Yellow are the counties where the plant is found and is considered rare. Orange are counties where it used to be found and is no longer, and the plant is native to states that are green in their entirety, though it may not be found in counties that are that darker green. So you'll want to decide your geographic limits here, and this may depend on your goals. You'll need to decide How close is close enough? When land managers approach a habitat reconstruction or restoration, they may try to limit their plants to selections of just things that would have previously grown on that site as much as possible or as much as realistic, because we don't fully know the history of every site. If you are creating a native garden for beauty and for wildlife, and supporting those co-evolved relationships that we talked about in our first webinar episode, maybe you'll choose plants that are native to the county or to the state that you live in. Next, we'll work on narrowing it down to plants that'll work in our space and creating a plant palette. So hopefully you found an online resource that will allow you to filter by site conditions. That will make this next part a lot easier. If not, it's just going to take a little longer. If you're using a book, you'll need to look through each plant's description to find the ones that meet your criteria. And we're mostly concerned, first of all, with sun and with moisture. So here's an example of what that might look like. This is from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. And this one, you can actually select your state. So you can go ahead and narrow at least to the state level using this resource. And so there's an option there to select your sun requirements, your soil moisture, and then there are lots of other things that you can select from. I'm going to suggest that when you're first putting your palette together, to choose as few of those as possible. That way we get the widest variety to choose from. And then you can narrow it down later if you're looking for something specific for your design. So we want to make a list of the plants that fit the criteria that we need. Don't forget to include ground covers with this. Also, you can use this time to narrow down selections of shrubs or of trees if they'll be part of your design as well. And put all of the plants into a table. You can do this handwritten, you can do it on a spreadsheet. And here are the things that you need to make note of. The common name. Definitely want to get the Latin, the scientific name of the species as well. When you go to shop for plants, it's going to be important that you have that because common names can vary a lot. They can be very confusing, and the same common name can refer to more than one plant, but the Latin name is always going to refer to just one species. You'll want to include the height. You'll want to include the spacing between them. Both of those will be important when you go to make pairing selections, when you go to draw them onto your graph paper so that you know how big to make them. And then I like to go ahead and include the light and the moisture here, just because many plants do have a range that they'll be happy in, and most garden sites are going to include a little bit of variety of some areas that are a little shady or some areas that are a little sunny, or even if the whole garden itself is full sun. If you plant a shrub in it, then the areas to the north and east, especially of that shrub, are suddenly now part shade. So and then the color throughout the year is important to make a note of. So I like laying out this table by months of the year and indicating sort of what color the plant is during that time, both the bloom, the green of the plant, and then whatever color it may turn in the fall, or if there's attractive seed heads, berries, those sorts of things, you can include that here. You don't have to get this involved, though. You can always represent color with dots, or just write down with words. So the blue wild indigo there on that top line, you could just write blooms purple, May and June. That would be sufficient. You can call it a day there. So whatever makes the most sense to you and seems reasonable. If this feels overwhelming, you definitely don't have to get this detailed. The goal is just to be able to look at your list and to see what is blooming at the same time, and to use that information to place plants next to each other, and to make sure you have something blooming all season long. So that brings us to pairing and placement. In this section, we're going to explore color theory. We'll talk about some design basics, and then we'll do some specific garden do's and don'ts. But most of all, I want to stress that the number one most helpful thing as you're learning to design your garden is to get outside and get inspired. Go hike in natural areas, visit other native gardens, go visit native nurseries. Observe plants, not just when they're blooming, but when they're emerging in the spring, when they're becoming dormant in the fall, when they're standing dry over the winter. Start to become familiar with the rhythm of the plants, the colors of the seasons, And you'll feel a lot more confident being able to echo those patterns and recreate them in your designs. So first, a quick detour into color theory. This is the color wheel. It has a spectrum of colors arranged in a circle according to their relationships with each other. If you want to keep one of these handy as you design, you can easily find resources online to look at as needed. I'll include one in the supplemental materials as well. And we can apply some color theory in the garden, which can be helpful if you get stuck and aren't sure what plants might look good together. So as you're looking at what's blooming at the same time and trying to decide which plants to place near each other, you want to consider some of these maybe. Also consider heights, consider growth habits, and we'll talk more about that in a minute as well. So types of color schemes, or sometimes also called color harmonies, that might look good in the garden and be useful to think about. All of these examples are using plants that can happily coexist in similar conditions, so feel free to try out some of these pairings if they're appropriate to your site. So the first is a monochromatic harmony, where different shades of the same color are used together. Think about using different textures and colors of green leaves next to each other, of pairing light and dark pink, like this purple poppy mallow and showy evening primrose. Complementary colors are opposite each other on the color wheel and make each other pop. It's a really energetic combo whenever you have those two opposing colors. If you think, for example, about red flowers with green foliage, or red berries in the fall and winter with green leaves, a really dynamic combination. So the example here for yellow and purple is Golden Alexander and Blue Wild Indigo. You can find great yellow and purple color combinations almost all year long in the Midwest. We've got asters and goldenrods together in the fall, look really great. Wild Sweet William and Golden Groundsel in the spring are wonderful. So it's just a fantastic combination, and one that is really present in our native plant palette in this area. Colors next to each other on the color wheel are analogous. For example, the blue, purple, and pink of this potted display, which includes the Wild Sweet William, Rose Verbena, and this lovely blue pot. Triadic color harmonies include 3 colors that are equidistant, basically drawing a triangle in any orientation on the color wheel. So in this case, we have our primary colors, yellow, blue, and red, as shown in the columbine, Virginia bluebells, and the golden groundsel, with a little pollinator feeding on it, just in case we forgot why we were planting native plants. So understanding these color relationships is a tool that you can use if you're having trouble choosing plant pairings or can't decide which to put next to each other. That said, placing one beautiful flower next to another beautiful flower is always a good idea. So if this isn't a tool that happens to be useful to you, don't worry too much about it. You can always pick what you like. Which brings us to placement. If you've ever decorated a mantle or a shelf, or if you've watched much HGTV, you may already have a sense of some of the elements that make a design visually pleasing, and we can apply a lot of those to the garden as well. So good design needs a focal point. This is most likely going to be one of your structural elements that we discussed in our 3 garden layers, but it could also be a boulder or a piece of garden art. The design needs balance. This is not necessarily identical symmetry, though this photo has examples of both. There's identical symmetry there on the bottom and balance without symmetry above. So need to have the various sides or the various areas of your garden feel balanced. Consider layering, both in terms of our 3 layers of different types of plants that we talked about, but also the layers from the human perspective. As you look through and across the garden, what are the different layers that you're going to see? Remember that odd numbered elements and groupings tend to be more pleasing to the eye than even numbers. And finally, simplicity and complexity can both be really beautiful if done well. So let's talk about some do's and don'ts. I have just one don't for you, and it's one I learned from experience the hard way. I didn't grow up with gardeners. but I grew up spending a lot of time in nature, observing and playing with plants. So when I started my first native plant garden several years ago, I bought 15 or 20 plants, all different species, and I put them randomly in this bed that you see here. I didn't use any ground covers. I didn't really have any real structural layer, and I didn't give too much thought to bloom times or visual appeal. I did kind of put taller plants in the back and shorter plants in the front. So from a design perspective, don't do what I did. I will say that this garden was totally fine. It attracted butterflies and pollinators and birds, and I loved it anyway because it was full of life and full of interest. But that said, it probably wasn't the best ambassador for my neighbors of what a native garden can truly be. So that's the don't. If you do any of the do's that follow, you'll be better off than I was. So do start with your structural elements. Consider shrubs, small trees, or even large trees, depending on the scale of your planting. Tall plants like the Joe Pyeweed there seen on the left, or goldenrods can also make a really great structural statement. Do place plants in groups of the same species for visual effect. It's also really good for pollinators. They can not only find the plants more easily, but a pollinator going along and harvesting from the flowers doesn't have to skip hop all over the garden. It can move through a big sweep or a big group of plants very efficiently. Do repeat your groupings, pairings, and patterns in multiple places throughout the design. Play with organic and geometric shapes, so curves and sweeps as well as straight lines. In the example on the left, this was done by Alan Branhagen, and it is the design for the Monarch Demonstration Garden at Luce Park outside the Garden Center. And the basis of this design is a little more formal to kind of suit the space. So the structure includes placements in straight lines, especially around the edges. As you move toward the middle, you can kind of tell just even looking at this design that things feel a little more organic, a little more more use of curves, more blending of plants. And then toward the outside, you have fewer species and things feel a little more orderly. And that just helps to kind of keep it within the feeling of the more formal location. In the design on the right, this courtyard is all concrete, right angles, hard surfaces. So we created lots of curves and sort of swoops and things that curl around to help balance all of those angles. So definitely play with both of those in your designs. You can play with both of them in the same design. You can experiment and see what you like. Do consider height. It's a really important reason why we made sure to note the heights of our plants when we made our palette. So you want to place taller plants in the middle of the bed or at the back of a foundation planting or border. This also involves thinking about the scale of the garden. So if you have a really small square footage that you're planting, you want to limit the overall height and size of plants in those small plantings, and you can scale up in larger plantings. Do pair plants with similar habits together. So place tall and aggressive plants together and kind of let them duke it out rather than letting them run over more delicate, less aggressive species. This is an aster and a goldenrod. Both of them tend to be boisterous and enthusiastic. I believe that this is aromatic aster and stiff goldenrod. And they're an excellent pairing. They they're both on the taller side. They both help hold each other up. Neither one is going to be overwhelmed by the aggressiveness of the other. And so they help to balance each other and really mimic nature. This is what plants do in nature, right? Likewise, we want to place shorter, less enthusiastic species together too, so that nobody's getting overrun. Do include ground covers and green mulch, and it's important to know how they'll behave. So some are clumpers, some are spreaders, and if you're using a clumper like the sedges in this photo, they need to be placed more precisely to ensure coverage. So you may even want to start your design by laying out this grid of the clumper green mulch. If you are using spreaders like the golden groundsel shown in this picture, you can sprinkle those in a little bit more randomly or organically feeling, and just have an eye to how they will spread in the future. So just one example of the need to do your research, which is the final do and will inform all of the others as you go along. So it's really important to read about and, if possible, get yourself familiar with in-person plants that you plan to use in your design. So finally, we're ready to start putting pencil to paper. I want to encourage you, especially if you feel that you are artistically challenged, that we're ultimately creating a garden here and not a work of art on paper. And while having a beautiful design on paper can be really satisfying, please don't judge yourself. First of all, you probably have a lot more skill than you realize. And secondly, we're just creating a map here. This is just a guide for planting. And we're ultimately more worried about the garden looking good than we are about the plan looking good. So try to give yourself a break on that. In this section, we'll talk about materials, both low and high tech. We'll talk about how to represent your plants in the design. We'll talk about getting started. Sometimes that's the hardest part. And then we'll talk about taking it to the next level. Okay, so the materials we'll need. First of all, you'll need graph paper. You'll need the site outline we created as you went through your site assessment in the last webinar episode. So whatever the outline of your garden is, you'll need that. You'll need some tracing paper to go over the top. This is what you'll actually draw on. So you're drawing your design on the tracing paper so that if you make changes or want to try out different things, you're not having to redraw the master outline every time. You can just use a new sheet of tracing paper. You can also just make multiple copies of your original outline, and that works great too. If you're using tracing paper, you'll need tape or paper weights or these little drafting circles, something that you can use to keep the paper stable and in place on top of your outline so that things aren't shifting around while you work. Circle stencils can be helpful for drawing the outlines of plants, but they're not required. You can always freehand it. And then you'll probably want something to add some color to the design. So colored pencils, markers, whatever you have is great for that. And finally, you'll need your plant palette as well to refer to as you work. If you're digitally inclined, you might prefer working on a tablet or on your laptop. Any kind of drawing or painting program that you're familiar with can work for this. My suggestion is to use whatever you know well and adapt that and kind of figure out a way to make it work for this, rather than trying to learn a whole new program at the same time as you're trying to do this design process. So if you're familiar with Adobe programs like Illustrator or Photoshop and you're a whiz at those are both excellent and powerful tools that you can use for things like this. If you would rather use a tablet and a stylus, Procreate is a great one. It is available only for Apple products, or Sketchbook, Concepts, and ArtRage are both Apple and Android compatible. So you might look into those. Most of them are not terribly expensive, and some of them have a free version that you can look at first. Also consider PowerPoint. If you've done any previous work creating presentations with PowerPoint, don't discount it for this. It has drawing tools and a lot of folks have access to it without having to buy something new. So I'll show you a few examples later that were done in PowerPoint and they work just fine. I personally love using a digital app and stylus because it's easy to carry around my iPad. And I have multiple designs to work on with me. I can keep photos of the sites all in the same place, and erasing, which I do a lot of, and so will you, is easier and less messy. One note with any kind of digital format, consider how you'll create the base outline and the graph paper grid. So you might need to take a photo or a scan of your master site sketch and use it as a background image, or create different layers, which is what I do with Procreate. I have a background image that is my grid lines and the property or the garden outline. And then I use the layers feature to create additional layers. So I have one layer that has the existing plants on there, and then another layer that has the new plants. I might even keep another layer with ideas or measurements or notes to myself, or maybe we want to play with different ideas for the site. Can draw those each on separate layers and then just choose which layers are showing in order to look at different ideas. And the layers just work like a stack of tracing paper. I can choose whether each layer is shown or not. And the analog version of this is to use multiple sheets of tracing paper. So use one sheet to make your existing plants, one sheet for your new plants, or if you want to try out a different idea, swap them out. It works just the same. So really helpful tools to think of it that way. So how are we going to represent the plants in the design? You can do this any way you want that makes sense to you. So there's lots of different examples here on this page. You can use different symbols for the different plants. You can make them all circles. You can do simple drawing of the plants or of the flowers. You can do blobs of different colors to indicate we're going to have a bunch of, this kind of plant in this area. So it kind of is, planted in this shape, and maybe indicate off to the side somewhere how many plants that is. Or any combination that works for you. And likely if it's something that you start doing, your style will sort of evolve over time. One thing you want to remember is to keep it to scale. So if a plant gets to be 6 feet around. So for example, in the image on the right here, those are shrubs, which are approximately 6 feet across. And if you can count that they're approximately 6 squares across. So you want to make sure that you keep those proportional. And then the little blue Virginia bluebells, those little circles in that same image, are just about 1 foot or so across. So keeping things to scale as you draw them. So even if I were to draw little bluebells in there, I want to keep those roughly to scale so that I know where to plant them, and I have a good idea of how much space they take up in the design. And of course, we want to include a key. Don't forget to include that so that you know what you mean when you look at it later. Okay, so let's talk about where to get started. There is nothing more intimidating sometimes than a blank sheet of paper. So here are a few places that you can try out to start and see what works for you. So definitely if you have plants that you are keeping that are in the space, draw those existing plants first. They're there, they're not going anywhere. Let's plop them in and then see if that sort of informs what we might like to have next to those plants. If you truly have a blank slate, no plants that are staying, start with that structural layer, the shrubs or tree placement, structural non-woody plants, and you can kind of build out from there in layers. This might also be the same thing as placing a focal point and work from there, but you might also have a different focal point that isn't a plant. You might have a boulder or a piece of art or a fountain in the garden. And so you can kind of work around that. What do you want to see right next to that? What's going to complement it? And go from there. So in the example on the right here, the front of the courtyard has a curved wrought iron fence that really sort of creates this place where it wants some drama. So we've got a shrub there, small tree, large shrub there that once you have that place, then you can think about what you want to go around that. So that may be a place to start. Go back to the questions that you answered as you did your site assessment is a great place to start as well. So what do you want to see out the window, or what do you want to be able to look on from your favorite chair on the porch? What do you want to smell as you walk by? So choose something that's informed by those questions and place it, and then go from there. You can just pick one plant and find a spot for it, and then look for a companion. So find something else from your plant palette that is blooming at the same time to pair it with. You might consider the color schemes that we talked about earlier. Pay attention to height differences and growth habits. If you're pairing 2 plants because you want to see the blooms together, but one plant is 10 inches tall and the other plant is 3 feet tall, you might not get the effect that you want if those blooms aren't going to really be near each other. Or maybe that is the effect you're after. There's really no wrong way to experiment here. So when in doubt, just start. Just put something down, pick a plant, and get started. You can always start over as many times as you need to. Just remember to protect that master sketch, because it's really frustrating if you have to draw that over again. So once you're comfortable with your process and you're pretty happy with your design, you might consider some additional ways to visualize your garden, both in time and in space. So the first one is to visualize some seasonal variations where you draw the design multiple times or draw it once and make copies is the easier way to do that. So you're going to make one for spring, one for summer, and one for fall. If you do it with a black and white base image, then you can just draw over the top of it with colored pencils. This is one I actually did in PowerPoint. I just took a black and white scan of the design, and then I made it the background image for 3 different slides. And on each slide I colored, and I'm using that term very generously. As you can see, I kind of scribbled the plants as they'd appear in that season, but it just gives you a good idea of like, where is the color in the spring, where is the color in the summer, where is the color in the fall? And you might find as you look at it like, oh, on the spring here, there really isn't anything in this, the area on the lower right. So maybe I need to add something there. Just a great way to think about how the garden is going to look as the year progresses. So you can also do the same thing with tracing paper, or just by making multiple copies of your finished design and using pencils. You might also want to look at perspective drawing and try your hand at this. So far we've only been looking at the garden design from directly above, and kind of visualizing it with our circles or our little plant drawings, or however we've done it. But the more experienced you get at design, the more you'll kind of be able to see in your mind's eye the 3-dimensional picture that you're building. But this is a really useful exercise, both to help you get there, and then, you know, even after you kind of can visualize that, going through this is really helpful. So either sketch the site as you see it while standing or sitting nearby, and add the background and kind of the garden outline, and then use your design as a guide and draw in the plants where you've placed them. And you can really simplify them. This isn't a botanical study. It's just a visualization exercise. Remember that nobody has to see this but you. You can also, I love this idea, take a photo and print it out at really low saturation, as my friend Sydney Ross has done here. And then she's just drawn in her plants. So you can see in the foreground there, she's drawn in the columbine. It's just a really simplified drawing, but you can kind of repeat that over and over. She's got her sedges, her little ground covers in between, just those little green spiky indications of, you know, where the plant will be and what it will kind of look like. So it does not have to be super detailed, but this is just a wonderful way to kind of look at this and be able to think about what you might want to change, or to be able to explain to another person, you know, this is sort of what it will look like. So this is an excellent stage to get to once you feel comfortable with the other steps that we've been through. So that brings us to the end of this program. As I mentioned at the beginning, I have a ton of links and handouts linked to you in the supplemental resources that accompany this webinar. You can check those out on mark.org or deeproots.org. For more information, you can contact either of those organizations with the information on your screen. And for more on design from expert landscape designers, I encourage you to check out the Planet Native Conference. There's always wonderful opportunities to hear people speak that you may not often get to learn from. So definitely consider that part of your continued education on native garden design. Really want to thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you back next time, which is our final edition of this webinar series. We're going to talk about year-round management of your native plant garden. So we hope to have you back. And again, many thanks to the Health Forward Foundation for their support.
Wow, that was a whole lot in a very short amount of time. I don't know about you guys, but the design process, I mean, I can plant like a maniac, but the design process was always something I wasn't comfortable doing. So that really helped me a lot with, well, confidence, one, just kind of having a process and knowing that it is doable, that just follow follow some instructions. And if you get really stuck, you've got great resources out there like Sarah, who can come alongside and maybe do a more complicated design. But anyway, that was outstanding. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. So as I mentioned, next month will be the last in this Lunch and Learn beginner/refresher series. We will bring it all together. Sarah will be here, as well as Matt Bunch and Roberta Vogel-Leuten on our panel to answer all of the questions. So I'm really excited to kind of wrap this series up. If you've missed any episodes, go back to our website and take a peek at them, as well as the resources. They're always going to be there. So we want you to know that we're always going to be able to come alongside when you get stuck in this series. So, and we want to give you a chance next month to ask your questions. If you know someone who's interested in native plants, native gardening, please invite them next time to join and show them our website, show them the resources and the videos we've done up to this point. So now I want to let you know about a few other things. So Native Plants at Noon occurs every third Thursday of the month. This month, we will explore the pine forests of the Missouri Ozark region. And I am so excited to share this site with you all. So please join us on the 19th of January for Native Plants at Noon on the road. Also want to announce we're having a few new upcoming programs in 2023. You will learn more details about those in our newsletter, the pollinator coming out the middle of this month. So anyway, we are looking to do some field trips this year for Native Plants at Noon on the road. So stay tuned there. Also, next month, as we've mentioned, we are going to finish up this beginners / refresher series. And our last segment will be called Native Garden Management Made Simple. So we've looked at our soil, we've planned, we've designed, we've planted. This is going to tell us how to actually care for those gardens and the gardens that we already have. So I'm really looking forward to that. This is a critical part, planning ahead for maintenance is always a really, really good place to sometimes start when you're looking at creating or managing a native garden. All of our events and webinars can be found at www.deeproots.org/events. While you're there, if you would consider making a donation, we would be grateful. So thank you for joining us. We will see you in a few months or a few weeks for Native Plants at Noon. And always remember, what you plant matters. Thanks.